Hello and welcome to another Industry Week event from Games. Today I'm happy to be welcoming Sophie from Needy Cat Games, and Sophie's going to be giving us some tips on freelancing as an artist. Once again, I'd ask you to try and refrain from using the chat function during the talk itself. Obviously say your hellos and things like that you normally do at the beginning of this session. But if you've got any questions for Sophie, put them in the Q&A section and then we'll get to those at the end of the talk. Hope you enjoyed today's session, and a massive thank you to Sophie for taking part in the session. It's our 15th Confetti Industry Week this year, so it's an interesting time this year because we're doing this one all virtually, but it's been really good so far, and I think it's been a real mix of interesting guests from every department, and we've had some fantastic games guests so far, and we've still got some more to come. So don't forget, if you still want to book in to events or haven't booked in yet, you can still go on the website, which is iw.confetti.ac.uk, and get yourself booked into those events that are on over the rest of today and tomorrow. Make sure though that you use your Confetti email to do that, or your NTU email. Any personal emails will get filtered out, so you won't get access to the event if you use a personal email. Also, as part of Industry Week 2021, we are running a competition where you can earn some really great prizes. All you've got to do is tag us on Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag IW21. Share your experiences of Industry Week in your post, and maybe try and be a bit creative with your posts as well. We're art students generally on these talks, so let's try and be a little bit arty and make our picture look cool and groovy. If cool and groovy is a thing, I'm not sure. Sophie, if you can just stay on the end of the call at the end, just to do some questions and a debrief. And students at the end of the call, if you can leave as quickly as possible, that helps us just turn things around quickly. And now, without further ado, let's hand over to Sophie for a fantastic session. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Hello. Hi everyone, I'm Sophie from Needy Cat Games. I am a game designer and a game developer, and what I've also previously done in previous jobs is working with freelancers and freelancers and the gig economy basically, and working with people who are artists, graphic designers, anything like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk to you about how art is part of the tabletop games industry and how important it is to the tabletop games industry. And I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about how to become a freelancer within that industry. And generally, these are tips for freelancing moving forward into whatever industry you end up working in. So we'll do that, and I'll go through. I'm going to do a presentation, so I'll just switch over to that now. Bear with me because this takes me a while. There we go. And then present. There we go. Right, okay, so art for the tabletop games industry. I'm Sophie. So who am I? I've sort of very briefly said it, but I'll just go through the details. So I've worked in the tabletop games industry for over a decade, and that started off as working in the shops for Games Workshop, who are the biggest retailer, biggest manufacturer of tabletop games really in the entire industry. They're a very, very big fish in a very, very small pond. So they're a great place to cut your teeth in the industry. And I ended up running the flagship store in Oxford Street after a sort of an extended career. I then went and tried to work in the real world, and I didn't really like it. So I ended up going back to Games Workshop and working in their design studio. And I was the art coordinator and archivist for about 3.5 years. So I managed up to 120 freelancers at any one time. I also helped coordinate the in-house artists and the art team, and liaise between all the different departments to make sure that art was delivered to spec on time and for like up to 10 simultaneous projects. If you're remotely familiar with Games Workshop, they do a huge volume of releases and game rules, and all of that needs art and graphic design. So that was the thing that I was basically integrally involved in. I also worked in the licensing department, which was a really eye-opening experience because I saw how other companies worked with the same kind of principles, and I also worked with computer games and app games and things like that. So I've got quite a lot of background in terms of sort of visual aspects to the tabletop games industry. Then I became a game designer and game developer for Needy Cat Games, which is where I've worked for the last 3 years. And we work very closely again with graphic designers and artists. All our games when we design them, we work very, very closely with the visual design as well. So that is a thing that we are very, very aware of during our design process. Oh, and finally, I host a podcast called Finding Games. You can find it on SoundCloud. And I talk to people who work in the tabletop games industry and talk to them about their journeys and their experiences about how they got into it, because there aren't actually that many courses about tabletop games specifically. It's a really diverse and interesting chat with a lot of different people, and lots of people find themselves working in this industry even when they've come from a completely random route, and it's really interesting. And if you want to learn about like getting experience in the industry and how to make a name for yourself, I really recommend it as a podcast, but I would be biased. So there we go. So I'll carry on now for the next slide. So here's just a few sort of projects and pieces that I worked with artists to produce. So I didn't make these, I'm not an artist. There are far more talented people out there, but here's just a few examples of the pieces of art that were made with me coordinating with them to make sure it matched the brief. And here's some of the licensed products that I've worked on in terms of computer games and things like that. So, you know, a little bit about my background. So I want to start the talk really by, first of all, talking about what is art in the context of tabletop board games. And I want to sort of make you really challenge your assumptions about where you think art lives within those games, because a lot of people think that this is great. These are great examples of art. They're very beautiful. They're sort of box cover art, or they might be in a double page spread in a really nice book, but they're not the only way that we get art. Here's a few more examples of what you might think in a tabletop game. So there's a really lovely map board that's from the game Scythe, fantastic game, I really recommend it. Or here's a box cover for Root. And down the bottom there is a series of character portraits for a game called League of Infamy, which has just started to deliver. It was a game that I wrote a couple of years ago, which has just come out from a Kickstarter funded project. So here again are some like really sort of standard examples of what people think of as game art. However, I want to really challenge you to have a look at this and think about all the different aspects of art that are on this sort of double page spread. Because a lot of people assume that basically in the bottom right hand corner you've got a lovely piece of what's a Chaos Space Marine piece of art, but a lot of people forget about all the other aspects of art. One of my favorite things about the tabletop games industry is that no matter your skill set, you'll probably be able to find a way to start getting experience. For example, on the left hand page, there's this thing called a page filler, which is just like a little Chaos Space Marine helmet with some symbols around it. And that is literally there to just break up the text, give your eyes a bit of a rest, add a little bit of texture and depth to the page. And also they fill up spaces. So if that text isn't quite big enough to fit on that page, that's what that does. And that's a lovely little illustration, and someone's had to have drawn that. And the person who draws that will not necessarily be the same person who's drawn the piece of art on the bottom right. Also on the right-hand side, there's like a symbol, and that's far more graphic in its design. So if you look on the left hand side, the page filler, it's very painterly, very sketchy, where the other side is like an icon that might be painted onto a miniature or represent something, and that's got a far more graphic effect. But it's been put in here again to give this specific Space Marine Legion called the Black Legion like a specific icon that associates with them. So that's been done by a third different person. In Games Workshop, when I worked there, now this was like 3.5 years ago, and they might have changed their structure, so that's, you know, that's up to them. But there was a person whose specific job was to make all of the little icons around the edge of the page. So you see the borders, each corner has a different symbol. Around the page numbers, there's also a completely different icon, and those were all done separately, and they were done almost like a jigsaw, and you could piece these pieces together. Also, the whole background is a piece of art which someone has made digitally as a background to the page. Every single one of those things is a niche that you could work in, and every single one of those things is needed to make beautiful documents, rule books, like different kind of companions for tabletop gaming. If you go through any kind of gaming book, you will see examples of this. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, or you happen to go into Waterstones and you flick through a Dungeons and Dragons book, you will see the same elements just in different styles. So there is always a space for art. That even if you're someone who says, well, I can't draw a huge battle scene with 300 people all battling at the same time, that's fine. Try doing these corner icons or page fillers. To sort of give you some more examples of that, let me carry on. So here are some further icons that you can see. These are from, what was it called? It was called Silver Tower. And it's Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. It was a game that came out a few years ago. And again, there was someone's job, it was to draw all of the floor tiles to a particular theme. Every single icon and every single card, every single token, all the different backgrounds, all the little pieces of art on the cards, all of that has been done by different people. So there's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of art resource required to make a tabletop game. Tabletop games require a huge amount of artists, graphic designers, layout people, people who are able to do do 50 doodles to fill in space. You know, that is the #1 way that people test artists as well. So it's really good to get into the habit of doing that sort of thing. Here's just another example. You can see some more painterly examples of on the left-hand side here with the skull. That's not like a really highly rendered piece of art, but it adds a lot of texture and depth to the page. And again, you can see all of those borders, again, like jigsaw pieces. Those all fit in together. They're all made as separate lines that can then be pieced together by a graphic designer. So it's worth keeping those in mind. Things like portraits as well will have been done by a different artist to the person who's done the background. Here's some more examples. I love this. This is from Nuala, who works at Games Workshop. These rats are just absolutely mind-boggling, and just a really cool example of how completely different styles of art can all fit together. Also, just notice that the icons on here were done by someone different, and so the icons have been placed in and layered in over the top of this piece of art. And here's just some board games that are more specific. I really like the Azul in the top left-hand corner. Fantastic game, by the way. But this has some really nice pieces of sort of design in it as well. Each one of those tiles has been designed, but then also the graphic designer has taken those designs and really incorporated the colors and the shapes and the designs into the gaming board that's next to it as well. So these things can all work together. And just some examples of cards and the different icons that you might need to create if you were to work in a board game environment. And also just a range of really interesting art styles. You don't have to be hyper realistic. The game on the top right hand corner is actually a game called Get Bit, and that is a fantastic game where you're basically playing divers trying to swim away from a shark while it eats you, and the pieces literally get removed, like the arms and legs, as as you start to lose the game. And it's got a very stylized, cartoony, kind of brightly colored look to it. So you don't have to go for hyper realistic at all. That's not a thing that's required. There will be options to do other things. So here's an example of those icons and the development. I asked Phil Moss, who's a friend of mine, who again works at Games Workshop in their in-house art team. And this is just a few examples of what he did when he was freelancing. And if you're the sort of person who's interested in working in the tabletop games industry, just creating a whole range of different icons, just decide a theme and challenge yourself. As you can see, there's like some on the left here, we've got like some rat themed and like animal themed kind of symbols. On the right hand side, we've got like lions and some sort of chivalry kind of theme to it. So I would say either pick a game that already exists or decide a theme of your own. And that could be anything. You could be like, alpacas who farm on the moon. It doesn't matter what you go for, and then just try and create like 10 or 20 little icons that could be space fillers or like icons on the corners of cards or anything like that, because that really forces you to innovate and change, and you'll start developing your favorite ones. And those are amazing things for portfolios, which I will show you later on. I'll talk about portfolios in a bit. And here's just some more examples of further developed examples of page fillers. And page fillers are really a great example of trying to fill your imagination into the space that you've got. So it's an example of how you can use the influence of what the themes that you're using, but also then doing it to a brief. So fit a specific space or match the theme to the page. And if you do that, you're going to practice and get better and better and better. And these are really great like practice pieces. And I really recommend that everyone does them. Here's just a few more that Phil sent me. He's extremely prolific and hateful because he's incredibly talented. I'm sure you all are as well, which I couldn't dream to do this sort of stuff. So he's great like that. Here's some examples of like armor designs that he's done and concepts, and these are really cool just as another thing, like a drawing exercise, but it just shows you that sort of work in progress that he does. To you see the little heads at the bottom here. He might be doing a larger piece, but those heads will almost certainly get reused as space filler. So even if you have pieces of art that you leave and abandon halfway through, the pencil sketches quite often get reused in books. And I really challenge you to have a look at game-based books and rule books, and you can see like the work in progress pieces that have been put in. You can see the little doodles that people have made, and that adds to the feeling and the theme of a product. So being able to do that at an early stage is fantastic. And here's just a few more developments by Phil there. So this is just some very quick examples of the sorts of range you can get within the tabletop games industry. And I don't want to dwell on it for too long, but it is really important that you understand that just because you're not someone who's going to draw a huge battle scene, that doesn't mean that you can't work in the tabletop games industry as an artist. So as I said right at the start, most tabletop games, most work in the tabletop games industry is freelance. That's because it's an industry almost entirely filled with small businesses. Games Workshop, yes, are a huge business, and there are other small businesses, well, sort of bigger businesses, Mantic Games, Privateer Press, Wizards of the Coast. These are all huge mammoth businesses in the tabletop games arena, Asmodee, but there are thousands of small businesses. Needy Cat Games is myself and my partner who run Needy Cat Games, and we write games on commission. People come up to us and say, I've got an idea for a game, here's your brief, and we write a game to that spec. There's only 2 of us. We don't have the capacity to pay for a full-time graphic designer, a full-time artist, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses just like us doing lots of different adjacent but not identical things within the industry. So a lot of the work you'll get is freelance, and especially if you're starting out in the industry, having that basis of freelance work that can go into your portfolio and build up a reputation will increase your chances of getting a permanent, more fixed job within the industry as well. And it's a great thing that you can do on the side while you're studying, if you're able to do that as you continue through your academic careers. So I just want to give you a few key pointers on being a freelance artist, okay? And this is where the most of what we're going to talk about the process and about how you can become freelance and how you can work once you're in that industry. So let's have a look. First thing, number 1 is please, I'm begging you, please get a portfolio. If you don't have your work online, nobody is going to pay you. Even if you send them 3 or 4 pieces of work, you might be lucky, you might get a bit of work. But if you do not have an online portfolio and you apply for a job, even if it's a full-time permanent job, and they can't see a portfolio of your work, that's it. They're not going to bother to invite you back for an interview. They're not going to consider you for a test piece because they need to see a body of work. Now, when you're first starting out, you might only have 3 or 4 pieces, but get into the habit of being comfortable putting that up somewhere for people to access now, and then you can build and build and build. And as you get better and better, you can add more and more pieces into your portfolio, and you can take away the things that you think aren't quite up to standard. It is a living thing. Please don't do the thing which I've seen other people do, which is they panic, put 4 or 5 pieces up on their online portfolio, and 5 years later it's exactly the same. It's not changed, it's not grown, because what that shows is that you kind of did it because you had to, and then you haven't really maintained it or grown it in any way. And there's no evidence that you've done anything since. And if you've not been practicing, then how do I know that you're as good as you were in your portfolio 5 years ago? So you can literally use like DeviantArt or ArtStation, or even Instagram is good enough, but you do need to have an online record. Some people have their own websites. That's great as well. You know, it just has to be a gallery of your pieces. Your portfolio, though, should showcase your strengths and range. And what I mean by that is that if you are an amazing pencil artist, put up amazing pencil art pictures. If you are fantastic at doing photorealistic composite images that then you draw over the top of, make your portfolio showcase your best pieces of work. If you are able to do both, or any other thing, you know, like if you're able to do chibi style cutesy illustrations, or you're really great at anime, then put that in. But what you want to do is show that you are able to do lots of different types of drawings. So if you are amazing at drawing mechs, then that's great. But if you have nothing but mechs in your piece, your portfolio, and I want to have some, you know, flesh and bone characters in my game, I might not go for you because I'm not confident that you will be able to do that. So you need to show range. If you're able to do it, put it in. Yeah, different palettes as well. Like, don't go for, if you're someone, because I'm really bad at this, I have particular colors that I'm really fond of, and I always stick to those colors. But you need to be able to show that you are able to draw to a brief, which means doing a range of different pieces. Can you draw organic shapes? Can you draw mechanical shapes? Can you show different textures, different colors, different times of day and night? Can you show it? Can you show things happening like in the sky and people floating around? Or can you do you know, underground pieces with low light levels? All of those different things, the more variety you put in, the higher your chance of landing those freelance roles, because it shows that you will be adaptable and be able to do things. And range also means not just having your final pieces. It also means showing your sketches. It also shows your development process. Show the full breadth of your styles and your designs and your work in progress and your process. If people can see that you've developed like a simple sketch and concept through to the final piece by showing 5 or 6 different versions of the same thing and how you've changed and modified it, people really like that. It shows that you put thought and process into what you're doing. Also add in like the icons that I challenged you to try and have a go at earlier. Put those sorts of things in, page fillers, background pieces. If I need an artist for a small game, and I say I want to make something that's really cheap and easy and accessible, and it's a little indie project, I don't want to be trying to coordinate 6 or 7 different artists. I'd much rather just work with one and give you the project and just let you do it. So if that means you're doing some background colors for cards, which are just nice textures to use when the graphic designer lays it out, and then you're also doing some icons for me, and you're also doing the cover art, that's amazing. And if you can show those sorts of things in your portfolio, you're going to have a much easier time trying to maintain work. That being said, so I've done a lot of information there. Do not include work you don't want to do. Like if you are like, I hate drawing full bodies of people, and I just hate it. Don't put in a piece, even if it looks really good, because if someone comes up to you and says, I want you to do 10 of that, and you don't want to, that's not going to work for you. So your portfolio is like an example of your gold standard and what you are willing to do and you are able to do within that freelance context. This literally happened to me when I was working for Games Workshop. We had an artist who had done a really beautiful picture of a space marine, but it just felt a little bit unfinished. And we went on his portfolio and he had this piece that was so highly detailed. It was like every single corner was so shiny. They'd done so much lovely texture and detail in it. And we were like, could you just do it to that level? Like, can you get it to there? Because you've already done it. And this artist nearly walked away because they were like, well, if you do that, I'll do it, but I'll never work with you again. And we were like, what? Like, how, why have you suddenly responded like that? And he was like, and it turned out that the client that he'd been working with had basically pushed him and pushed him and pushed him and pushed him to make that piece. And it was really stressful and really unpleasant for the artist. And he never wanted to make anything that detailed again because it was so difficult for him to do. So he shouldn't have put that piece, no matter how beautiful, in his portfolio. Because what he was saying by putting it in his portfolio is, I can do work like this. If you don't want to do work like that, don't put it in your portfolio. And a last point is, and this is something that I'm sure no one is guilty of, but if you have lots of of the same thing in your portfolio, try to challenge yourself to step outside of that. If you have lots of pictures of just like, I don't know, the same single character that you're really fond of drawing, that's great, but that doesn't show range, and that shows me that are you going to find it difficult that I want you to draw a completely different character in a different scenario. Specifically as well, if you're drawing lots of fantasy art, that's great, but just make sure that you're doing a range of different characters, body shapes, body types. The amount of portfolios from professional artists where they only do beautiful thin elf women, and you're like, well, that doesn't show me that you can draw anything other than that. And no matter how beautiful the pieces are, that doesn't help me at all. So just try and give yourself a big range of product, try and show lots of different work in progresses, lots of different types of art. Icons are great. There's a artist that I've worked with in the past, and she's amazing. And some of the best pieces of art that she's actually got on her portfolio are lots of small illustrations that went on cards. So she has a whole range of like pieces of meat, because she was doing a dungeon crawling fantasy game, and you drew these cards which had like a piece of meat so you could eat it and gain health, and she had to draw like 10 pieces of meat. But having those lots of little icons as an example is a great way to show I'm willing to draw whatever, and I can draw to different sizes and to different briefs. So have those things in your portfolio and be willing to keep it up to date and maintain it. Okay, so that's point number one. This is a general tip for freelancing, and it doesn't matter where you go or what you freelance, what industry. This is a thing that is like a legend amongst freelancers and amongst the sort of gig economy, and is brilliantly presented by Neil Gaiman. He did a talk to the University of Arts class of 2012. It's a bit old, but you can go on YouTube and just, if you put in like Neil Gaiman graduation talk, you'll probably find it. It's a brilliant 20-minute talk. I recommend every single one of you goes and watches it. It's fantastic. But he talks about, and it's talked about as well in other places, about the 3 attributes of a freelancer. And that's high quality, on time, and easy to work with. And the fact of the matter is that as a freelancer, you will not be perfect, because no human is. But if you can get 2 out of those 3, you're fine. Okay, so if you do amazing quality work and you turn in these beautiful pieces, and you are a lovely person, you're communicative, you take on feedback really well, you're enthusiastic about the project, people will forgive if you deliver it a little bit late. If your quality, if you are a bit nervous about your quality, and this is really important to be self-aware about your own skills, and that is something that comes with time and practice, so don't panic to get this all right now. But if like you're someone who, or you're a bit worried about, you know, maybe your stuff's not quite as highly polished at the end, or maybe it's a little bit more fuzzy, or you use a lot more kind of rougher techniques, or however you want to talk about your work, although you shouldn't put yourself down. If you are always on time and you are enthusiastic and passionate and communicative, and you always respond when they give you feedback, people will forgive that your quality isn't quite as high as everybody else's. That is just the fact of the matter, because you are reliable, and reliable artists are so rare. They are a breed unto themselves. And if you find a reliable artist who does consistently decent work, it doesn't have to be the best in the world, but consistently decent, then an employer will grab you with their claws and grip until their knuckles go white, because it is so rare to find someone like that, and it's so key to keep a business running, especially if you've got lots of projects on. So that is a fantastic thing. If you have great quality work and you deliver on time, people will forgive if you go quiet for 3 weeks at a time, or you're a bit grumpy. It's just the way it is. So you can pick 2 of those 3. But if you go to 1, then people will maybe use you for 1 project, but they might not come back. If you manage to do all 3 consistently, then you will be offered a job. That's just the way it is. But don't panic. You don't have to be perfect, because human beings are not perfect, and your work doesn't have to be perfect. But, you know, if you feel like maybe being on time is your weak spot, because I know that's my thing as a freelancer, then I work on the other 2 a lot. I really double down on those. I make sure my quality of my product is really high, that I hand over, and I try and make working with me as easy and as enjoyable as possible for the people who are my clients. And that means that I stay in work. I'm very lucky that I've never touch wood, in the last 3 years, struggled to find work if I've really needed it. So, you know, reputation means a lot within the industry. And if you can maintain 2 of these 3, then other people will start recommending you. And if you're good to your clients, those clients will recommend you to new clients. So that's a really important principle just for freelancing in general. So now we're going to talk about the process of creating art. Let me just check the time. Yep, doing good. So the art creation process, there's a lot here, and it's okay if you don't memorize it all. I just want to give you like a whistle-stop tour. And I just want to go through like the principle so that you recognize it if you ever have to go through it. And once you get really experienced, then newer clients will really appreciate you like coaching them through this process. So that can be another like feather in your cap if you become an experienced freelancer. So the first point of any briefing and art based on a brief kind of work you need to do is to be clear and have clarity in your work. And it is number one important that you realize that it is your responsibility. It is always your responsibility to seek clarity at every stage. And that means asking questions, getting references, checking understanding, double checking understanding. Google Translate, if you work, there are companies all over the world and a lot of them use Google Translate, and that's fine. I worked with many very talented artists all across the world in Taiwan, Singapore, but don't rely on just Google Translate. If you physically don't understand what they're asking you to do, try and like, if they're saying move the shoulder pad and you're like, what does that mean on my piece? I don't understand. Literally circle the shoulder pad and put a question mark next to it on your piece of art and send it off. Like make it as clear as possible. Use pictures. Make sure that you get your idea across as clear as possible. And if that means circling things and drawing arrows, do that as well. You need to do as many things as you can to get as much clarity as you can. Get your information from the source. Okay, so as well, if someone says, I want you to do the Monopoly characters, but in this style, and you Google Monopoly, and the first one that comes up is Barbie Monopoly for whatever reason. If you don't ask your client to provide you reference photos and you base everything on the Barbie Monopoly, then your stuff is wrong. And yes, your client absolutely should have sent you reference photos, but do not ever trust Google. Trust your source. Go back to your source, the person who is paying you, and ask them to provide references for your work. And that's what you should always do, because Google will give you false positives and you will think you know exactly what you're doing, but it will be, the reference pictures will be wrong, they'll be out of proportion. This used to happen all the time when I worked for Games Workshop, because Space Marines are their most iconic miniatures that they sell, and they are very, very keen on the silhouette of a Space Marine and the proportions of the Space Marine being very correct. If I Google a Space Marine piece of art, I will get thousands of pieces of fan art, and fan art doesn't necessarily have the correct proportions, it doesn't have the correct silhouette, and that will be wrong. And I will have to send that back to the artist after they've already done a whole load of work and say, this is wrong, because they based it on a piece of reference art that was incorrect in the first place. So make sure that you get your information from the source, and never assume you know what you're talking about. Always double check, and always be like, this is the sort of thing I've done, is this correct, before I carry on. Always check your work, because otherwise you have to go back and do a load more work on top. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. So the process. So first thing is they'll commission you, then they'll brief you on the work they want to do, then you send them work in progress, then you deliver your final piece, then you do amends. There are always amends, always. You've got to accept that's part of the process. People, the amount of artists who I know who get really upset and frustrated because there is an amend, like a week later, because they realize the color is slightly off, or it's not bright enough, or whatever it is, there are always amends. You need to accept that's part of the process. To the extent of the amends, that's a different thing. And then get paid. Now, I'm going to put at the start here as well, if you were doing a lot of work or a big piece of work, like a large volume, there is nothing wrong with asking for a deposit or a payment plan that pays you like every 2 weeks, as long as you deliver certain work. But in principle, if it's like a single piece, you generally get paid at the end of the process. Right, commission. Always have a contract signed. I cannot tell you how important it is for you to have a contract And you must agree a fee and write that into the contract before you do any work, especially if you're working with friends and family. I have seen friendships destroyed over a disagreement a year down the line because one person did a piece of art for the other one for a product. They got paid like 50 quid cash in hand and they were mates, but then suddenly that product makes 2 million on Kickstarter, and the person who did a load of the work for 50 quid's like, hang on a minute, you've just made 2 million pounds, I should be getting some of that. And they're like, but I gave you the money, 50 quid, and there's no contract. That's going to be a nightmare. Things will be destroyed, and you never know how successful your work will be. It might get republished in 20 years time. You want to be covered if that happens. Okay, so over the internet, you can literally just Google search for a contract. A lot of legal websites will allow you to do like a free 2-week sign up, which give you standardized contracts, and you can sign up, get a couple of standardized contracts, and then unsubscribe. And that is a really great way of getting a really nice, just simple, easy, accessible contract that you can both read through and agree on. You will not have a leg to stand on about getting paid and chasing payment if you do not have a contract. And this happens to a lot of people, especially if they do online commissions, literally through the web, through the internet. They'll do the work, they'll send it off, you know, a digital piece of art, and then they'll never get paid. And if you haven't got them to sign a contract, you've got absolutely no way to make sure that they pay you. So always get a contract. This again happened with Games Workshop when they first started out. 40 something years ago now, where there was a load of chaos symbols were drawn by a mate down the pub, and they literally bought him a couple of pints as a thank you, and they got printed in the original book. And then when they got reprinted, the artist was like, well, no, you don't own those. I gave you permission to use those in that one publication, so you can't reprint it without giving me money, and you can't reuse those without giving me more money. And he won. So like they're in their archives, there are these images that say do not ever use again, because quite regularly, every kind of 10 years, someone who's designing a t-shirt or something will go through the archive and go, oh, that's a really cool symbol, and they'll stick it on a t-shirt or put it in a book, and then he sues Games Workshop for another 10-20 grand every time. So you have got to be on it. You've got to make sure you've got your contract. That is number one point. And I know I'm laboring it, but it is the most important point of all of this. Brief. So as I said about clarity, these are just some examples of the sorts of things you will need to find in your brief. Number one is a due date. I like to agree work in progress delivery dates. That's not a thing that a lot of people do. And as a freelancer, you probably won't get asked for that, but I would set yourself some deadlines. I don't know if you're like me or a lot of the artists that I've worked with in the past, but if you have no deadline, it's very tempting to leave it until the very, very final deadline and then panic and try and do the whole project in 3 days. And that's just going to be a disaster for everyone, and it's not great for your mental health either. So give yourself work in progress delivery dates. That means that you show them every week or every 2 weeks or however long your deadline is, a regular work in progress update. It means that you've got a reason to keep working on the piece on a regular basis, and they can give you early feedback. If something is completely wrong and it's just a 2-minute pencil sketch, that is a hell of a lot easier to fix than getting to the final version when you've beautifully colored it and shaded it and done all your extra stuff and go, oh, by the way, that whole character on the left is supposed to be a completely different character. That doesn't help. And it makes it horrible and stressful to fix, because you should have checked in with them sooner, because it's your responsibility to have clarity on the piece you're working on. Size, with and without bleed. Bleed is a thing that happens in printed publications. And this is a thing where you basically get like an amount of space around it that you have to paint into. If you're anyone who plays board games, when you get like token sheets and they'll have like a big circle of art and then the token will sit within it, that's because printing and cutting don't always line up perfectly. So if you've got a token that's this big, like say it's 2 inches wide, but the actual token piece is only 1.5 inches. Who uses inches anymore? 1.5 inches wide. The whole point is that extra half an inch gives you space for that token to move around within the cutter so that you don't lose the art. And that's a really important thing to know. Your resolution, how big are you drawing this to? Description of your setting, description of the scene, the figures, the assets that you're creating, reference images, and not just reference images for maybe the characters you're drawing or the pieces of art that they want you to do, but reference images for palette, for tone, for art style, for characters, color schemes, reference images for iconography. If you're basing it on miniatures, you want to have reference images of your miniatures so that you can draw them accurately. Specific requirements. So this is a really important one if you're doing any board game art for like the cover of a board game box or for the cover of a rule book is, do you have space for a title? And have they told you that? Where is that going to sit? Because if you make all the faces at exactly the point where they want the title to sit, that art is not going to work for them. So you've got to make sure that you know this information beforehand. Make sure that you know information like, do you need to paint every character on a different layer so they can reuse the artwork in different ways? And that's something you should know at the start, because trying to put all your characters onto different layers later on is, again, hellish. It's a really difficult process for you. So the more information you know at the start, then the easier your process will be, okay? Work in progress. I've already talked about work in progress, but you should always, at the very start of a process, when your first sketches, just send them 3 or 4 2-minute thumbnail sketches, literally stickmen if you have to, just giving an idea of layout, composition, characters, lighting. These ones that I've got here were the best I could find. These are still too advanced for what you want for your initial early concept sketches. But when you do that, literally very, very simple blocked out stuff, they get a chance to choose the one that suits, and they might be able to give you feedback at that point, like, oh, actually, this particular character is the most important, so please bring them to the fore. And this also includes things like iconography. So like you could do like a little skull with like a circle around it, and a skull with a wreath coming out of it, and a skull with a hat on, and a skull with 2 spears crossed over behind. And they might want to pick which one they prefer out of all of those as their piece of page filler, okay? And it takes you like 5 minutes to do it, and it shows that you're really good at communication. It's just a really easy win for everyone all round. Make sure that you're open to feedback as well. Now, this is a thing, I'm going really quickly because I don't have much time, but I really need to double down on why it is important for feedback, okay? When you show a piece of art to someone that you have worked on and you're really proud of, you're basically showing them a little piece of your soul, okay? Because that's what art is. And when someone says, I don't like it, that hurts. And I understand that hurts. Excuse me. I get that that's a painful thing to hear. But feedback is the thing that A, makes you better, and B, makes sure that you can deliver the best quality piece of art that you can possibly deliver. It is a skill to receive feedback. It is not something where you were just naturally good at it. No one is naturally good at hearing someone say they don't like their art. There are some people who are naturally, like, they're a little bit better, but it still hurts, and you have to overcome that. Now, there's a few tips here that I want to give you. Number one is, if you have time, give yourself 24 hours before you respond. It is really easy to give a knee-jerk reaction of, well, it's like that because of this. And, you know, you asked me to do that, and I've done exactly what you asked. And all of that, you might be true, but because you're feeling hurt by the feedback, then you can say it in a less diplomatic way. Or also, you might just be wrong, and sometimes that's the case. And I'm not saying you are, but give yourself that time. That is tip number one. Tip number two is to ask more questions, because people who commission art aren't always the best at giving feedback or understanding art. The people who you are talking to, your clients, are almost certainly not artists. So they might say something like, I don't like it. And that might be the piece of feedback you get. And that is terrible feedback. It's so unhelpful. But giving yourself that space, 12 hours or 24 hours, and then going back with that original point we said about it is your responsibility to gain clarity, okay? So go back and be like, okay, so what is it about it you don't like? Is it the character? And then you can ask some more specific questions. Could you give me feedback on the characters? Can you give me feedback on their poses? Can you give me, and you just prune down and prune down and prune down. Try as well to ask more open questions rather than closed. So is it too dark? Yes or no? Doesn't help you. If someone says no, you still don't know what the issue is. Saying like, what do you think of the character's facial expressions? Then they can be like, I don't like it, doesn't fit. Okay, could you explain the sort of thing that it could fit? Could you send me a reference photo of the sort of thing that you need? Could you give me some feedback on where they should be looking? Or, you know, you can prune down and find out what you can do to improve it. It takes time. It's painful, but it is a skill that is invaluable if you're going to be making art professionally as a job. Is a thing that you need to get good at, and that means learning a skill. Okay, so feedback is really important, and the quicker and the more efficiently you can respond to feedback, the easier the art creation process is when you're doing it to a brief. what you are doing is you're making art for a client, you're not making it for yourself. So this isn't about your opinion. You are allowed to push back and be like, no, if you do that, it's going to block out this image and it's going to look really dominating in the frame, and I'm not sure that will work. But it's about willing to have those conversations and trying to work out something between you and the client. And the more work in progress you give and the more feedback you ask for, the earlier you can fix problems. If you don't send them anything until you've spent 8 weeks working on this beautifully, highly rendered, beautiful piece of art that you've spent 8 weeks on, and they tell you it's wrong, you've got to redo that piece of art because you never asked for feedback, okay? So the sooner you get that feedback, the quicker you can make those changes. And then there comes a point where, you know, if they've approved like 6 previous work in progresses and then they suddenly want a complete pose rechange, then you can be like, hang on, no, that's not covered in the process we've been doing. I'm going to have to charge you extra. And we'll go into that a bit more in a minute. And also just a really important thing, communication is so key. And the moment you realize you're running late, tell them. Do not wait until the due date and go silent for 3 weeks and then send them a finished piece and be like, oh, sorry, or just don't ghost people. It is the most infuriating and stressful thing. And you can be the best artist in the world, but if you ghost your client, that will be heard by other potential clients and it will be harder for you to get work. So just say if you're running late, even if it's 3 or 4 days. Yes, I have had it where clients have got upset with me because I'm running late, but it still has been a better outcome than if I had just gone silent and delivered a late piece of work. And it is, again, it's difficult, but it is something that you get used to, and it is a skill, and it's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the better you get. Here's my feedback run. So yeah, asking for questions, send regular work in progress, and a quick last point, do your work on separate layers. Oh my goodness, this is so important. If you have multiple characters or a separate background, or you know, you've got multiple elements, even if it's like I've got some spears crossed over behind a skull, draw them on separate layers, because then if something is wrong, it's so much easier. Like if they say the angle of the spears doesn't quite work, you can just isolate that layer and move it. You don't have to redraw the entire piece. And it is so important to keep your work on separate layers and to keep disciplined layers. And I know that's really difficult when you're in the art creation process. Again, it's a skill that you have to practice, but make sure that you remember that this is to all make your life easier and to make it more efficient for you, okay? And once you get into the habit of it, it will make your life easier. I've literally had it where when a final piece has come through, I've been like, that looks great, but just the first character, now that you've colored in the background, just looks a bit too dark. And they were able to isolate that layer and just up like the brightness on that one layer. And it made such a difference because they didn't have to go and redraw anything, or they didn't have to somehow clip it out and it looked really messy and redraw things back in. It just makes it easier. So put your layer on separate, put your art on separate layers for each element of your piece of work that you're doing. So you deliver your final piece to the size and resolution and the format that they request. Do not send it in CMYK if they ask for RGB. Do not send it at 200 DPI if they ask for 500 DPI. Do not send it as a PDF if they ask for a JPEG. These are all things that are really important and make your client's life so much easier. The amount of times I've had to just convert and struggle through converting pieces of art from one format to another because the artist just won't send you anything that's to the point that you specifically asked for in the original brief. So just be really aware of those sorts of things. Again, it just makes you look like a really easy to work with person. And it is a quick win. It's not difficult to just send it in the correct, you know, color format and the correct file format. Send it promptly. When you say you're going to send it, send it. I have spent like a big chunk of my life pulling my hair out because I'm waiting for a final piece for 4 weeks. And, you know, like the printers are waiting for it and they've literally printed half the book and we just need this piece in and it's finished and we've approved it and we've said we'll pay them the moment they send it to us. And then they just don't send it to us for 3 weeks. It's so stressful. Don't put people through that. And also it means you get paid quicker. So why wouldn't you? Dropbox or Google Drive is fine, or also WeTransfer is another great way to transfer your files. So just make sure that they're getting a high quality image. I've had people send me through low quality JPEGs and then go, well, it won't let me attach the high quality version. Well, find a way around it. Get a Dropbox account. Get Google Drive, ask them if they have an FTP server, ask them how they would like it delivered to them, because they might go, oh, we always use WeTransfer. However you're going to do it, you have to make sure they get high quality files. You can't send them low res files and expect to be paid. and then you send your invoice, okay? And make sure you send your invoice as promptly as possible. And then you need to get used to, and this is another skill, talking about money and asking to get paid. We'll get on to that. Amends. They're an inevitable part of the process, okay? As I said at the start, the scale and volume and time scale of your amends is up to you of what you're willing to do. You should be willing to do some level of amends, but as I said, there's a big difference between changing the brightness on a couple of characters or changing the eye color from red to blue on a Space Marine. Those are things that are simple and quick, but going actually, literally I had this as a thing that happened. We'd gone through the whole approvals process. I'd had it approved by multiple levels of management, and it was a picture of a land speeder, which is basically like a floating car, effectively. I mean, it's not, but we'll take it. And it was zooming away into the distance. And a manager turned up a week before it was due and went, "Oh, could they just spin that round and have it driving towards us instead?" Well, no, that's not an amends at that point. That's a completely new piece of art, because it's totally different. You can't just twizzle the piece of art around. That's not how that works. And I had to explain, if they wanted that, I wasn't even going to ask the artist to amend that. That is not an amends. That is a new piece of art, and they will have to pay for the artwork again. And that's what ended up happening, because that is not an amends. That is not a tweak. That is a full piece of art again, even if you're keeping the background the same. So this is something that you must lay out in your contract and set expectations at the start of the process, okay? I will do 3 small-scale amends, for example, changing the color of a piece of an item of clothing or some eyes, amending brightness, slightly tweaking, maybe if someone's got like an awkward grip on a weapon, like redrawing a couple of fingers maybe, like that sort of thing. But then if you require pose changes or completely different backgrounds, those will require an additional fee. And if you were set that at the start, when they ask you for amends at the end, you know exactly where you will stand. I actually know artists who say they will do up to 4 amends or up to 2, because they don't want someone coming back asking for an amend. They do the amend, they send off the amended file. 3 weeks later, they get another amend request and another, and they're all staggered out 3-4 weeks apart. You've got other work coming in by then. You can't be doing with this. So there is a limit. Or sometimes people put time limits on. That is up to you to decide, and will develop as you get more experienced. And the more you do this, the more refined those details will get. Everyone learns from experience. James and I have had exactly the same thing at Needy Cat Games, where we have, we're willing to do tweaks and amends, but then someone says, "Oh, can I just have battle cards for these other 20 models?" And because we didn't define what amends were in our contract, we kind of had to in that context. But then you can guarantee that the next project, we defined exactly what an amends was and how many we were willing to do. So you will build up that experience, but just have it in your mind and have it in your contract. That is entirely on you and based on your experience and your willingness. Different artists are willing to do different things. Getting paid. So always send your invoice. I have literally had to chase artists and harass them to send me invoices so I can pay them. And that is not how you want to get into a habit. There are so many people out there like, "Oh yeah, I'll do it some other time." No, send your invoice. The moment you agree that it's a final piece and you're told you can send your invoice, send your invoice. Actually check you've been paid. If they tell you you're going to be paid within 2 weeks, check your bank and make sure. Because if 6 months later you realize you weren't paid for that project, it's going to be an awful lot more difficult for you to pursue that money and prove that you didn't get paid. So ask for your money, get it sent off, and check your money's been paid. Chase them if they have not paid you, and do it the day that they say that they're not going to pay you. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and it is a skill. It is not pleasant. I hate doing it, but I've just got to a point now where I've had to do it so many times that I've got used to it. But if you don't mention it, if they don't pay you and you go, "Oh, maybe they'll pay me in another week," and then you leave it and you go, "Oh, maybe they'll pay me in another week," then they know that they can just not pay you for a couple of months. That's nice and easy for them. They'll keep that in mind. Be the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. Be that person. Because the quicker you remind them every couple of days, they will just pay you to get rid of you. And that's fine, because you can be friendly and approachable and nice the whole time you're doing it, but you can still make sure that you're getting paid. And just be aware that if it's not in your contract that you want a final version of the product, you might have to buy it. if you want a copy of it. Games Workshop do not, well, at least this was 3 or 4 years ago, do not habitually send everyone a copy of whatever they worked on, because they have so many artists working on their books. As I said, I was working on like 120 artists working over 10 projects simultaneously. They don't have the time to keep track of every, like the artist that did 3 icons for each of those 10 books. So they're not going to send that person 10 books because they can't remember, well, they can't keep track of everyone who works in everything all of the time. So if you want a copy of the game that you're working on, if you want a copy of the book, you need to specify that in your contract as some of your payment conditions. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Or just be okay with buying it, like up your fee so that it accommodates you having to buy it at the end. So that is a whistle-stop tour. I've talked very, very quickly. I'm really sorry about how quickly I've sped through that all, but I wanted to give you time to ask questions at the end. And I know we've only got a limited amount of time. So at this point, I'll say, any questions? Now, this is where I've got to do the Q&A thing. Right, okay. See what we've got here.
Hey, there we go. I didn't know if I was just a disembodied voice or not, but I'm here. You can see me, I think, now as well. We've got a few questions coming in. Yeah. I
can probably stop sharing now.
So I'll read them to you because I don't think you can see them, Soph, can you?
I can, but it's fine.
You can. Yeah. So got a good one from Imogen there. With freelancing, do you need a background in games art specifically? Or can you just have a degree in art and be a freelancer in the games industry still? Are they looking for people with specifically games art related things, or is it just art in general?
There's always going to be the challenge of, if you've done it before, it's easier to get more work in that industry. But the way you get that experience is by doing it. Like it's exactly the same thing. We get lots of people coming up to us saying, "Oh, I wish I could design games," and it's like, well, just design one then, make it. So if you want to have a portfolio that has game art in it, make some game art and put it in your portfolio. And even if it's not in a professional context, if you've reskinned Love Letter the game, or which is a really common thing that lots of people do because it's such a lovely little game and it's only got a small amount of cards, but it's a really beautiful little project to do, then that's a great example of you going out and learning it and teaching it to yourself. Yeah. If you want to start getting experience, you could, now this is okay, so I'm going to preface this. Do not work for free. Never work for free, okay? Because your time is valuable, but free is different to not getting paid money, okay? So if someone can give you something of value, which isn't money, then that's still maybe worth it depending on where you are, and that's only a decision that you can do. So for example, if you've got a friend of yours who's designed a game and they need some art, and you want a portfolio website and they can help you make your website and you can do a bit of art for them, then you've both got a reciprocal experience out of that. But you know, that is on your back and your decision to make as to exactly how far you push those relationships, but you shouldn't work completely for free. But that doesn't mean that if you want to get into the art for tabletop games industry, you can't just start making art and showing your skills, because the tabletop games industry is still very young. It's very new. We're a very nice, supportive industry. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say it's perfect because it's not, but like I run the Nottingham I've got it rolls off the tongue. Nottingham Tabletop Industry Collective, and it's on Facebook. And we also have a Discord server, and we're a lovely community. There's about 300 and something people on there now, all sort of vaguely Nottingham or Midlands based, although we do have some more international people in there now. Who are all working in the industry, and some are just starting, some have been working in the industry for 20 years. We're all different, and we will all give you feedback and give you support. And there are regularly job adverts in there as well. There's also another Facebook group called Art and Graphic Design for Tabletop Games, and it's a fantastic resource. There are people advertising for work in there all the time. And I would just be open and honest and be like, here's my portfolio. I've not worked professionally before, but I'm really keen to get some experience. So even if you need someone to do icons or like the smaller scale stuff, I'd be really keen to work for you. And you have no idea how keen people are to have people like that on board, because if you're enthusiastic and passionate about the project, you're going to get a good result out the back. And that is always something that people are keen on. As I said with the freelancing, you know, good quality, on time, easy to work with. If you're already easy to work with before they start, that's going to put you in really good stead. So, you know, don't go and like approach loads of companies and go, I will do all your art for free. Don't do that. But you can create and build your portfolio even if you don't have qualifications specific in the industry. Specifically as well, as I said, I do have a podcast that's called Finding Games, because, you know, when I first started working in the tabletop games industry, there were no tabletop games qualifications. Almost everyone who works in it has no specific qualifications. We have come in through random directions. When James used to work in the game design studio, his colleagues were, he had a previous chocolatier, a previous deep sea diver, and a previous teacher were all people who sat on desks around him. So do not feel that just because you haven't got a qualification specific in that area, you can't work in that area. That's totally not how it works. If you're passionate and you're willing to put the work in and you're willing to make those connections and network, which is more important than anything else you can do, is just networking, then you can be in the industry. So come and join us on the Nottingham Tabletop Industry Collective. And I also recommend that other one, Art and Graphic Design for Tabletop Games.
Are you okay to post some links for those in the chat, Sophie, just so
I
they can follow them if you can? Yeah, I mean, obviously not right now, but yeah, if you can try at some point.
I will happily give you, and I can send an email with like a whole bunch of connections. And the best thing you can do is just join those communities. And even if you're a bit nervous, just don't say anything for a few weeks and see how people interact, and then just start having part of the conversation. If I know you and I know you're a nice person, I am far more likely to give you work than if I've never heard of you before. Even if you live on the other side of the world, if I've interacted with you on multiple times and you're keen and you're passionate, and I've seen examples of your work because you've asked for feedback and then you've responded to that feedback really well, then if I need someone to do work for me and I already know you're good at that, I'm more likely to give you work. I'm not going to spend hours trawling the internet for someone I don't know when there's someone who I do know right there. That's how it works. So yeah, just go out there and start networking.
Yep.
Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Great advice, though. Great advice. So I've got a couple of questions about the sort of payment side of things here. We've got one from Lexi. If the client refuses to pay, what happens then? Are you able to pursue them for it, or is that all related to the contract that you signed?
It's all related to the contract, to be honest with you. The fact is that in the real reality of things, if you're a very small freelancer just starting out, you don't have the financial capacity to sue people the moment they don't pay you. However, there's lots of things you can do. If you've got a contract, people are far more scared to break contract. A lot of people do not hand over the final version until they've invoiced or they've had confirmation that they will get paid. That's fine. If you want to do that, that's totally fine. Remember, networking is so powerful. It will get you work, but it also insures you against bad actors. Okay, so if you have a really strong network and this person also circles in that network, and you tell your network that this person hasn't paid you, no one else in that network is ever going to work for them again. So it's a two-way street, and it insures you. So networking is really important on both sides. And reputation, you know, they don't want to get a reputation for being the sort of people who are unreliable. Do check your clients, though. Don't just go and work for some random person who contacted you out the blue through automated like message on your website in broken English, and you can never get a face-to-face meeting with them. Not necessarily in person, but like over the internet. Remember that there's a hierarchy of communication, face-to-face being number one, then like being able to see the person is like number two, then like on the phone is like number three, then like typed communication is like number four, and like text messages and WhatsApp messages are like right down the bottom. So if they're only communicating you through the lowest form of communication, then the clarity is not going to be there, and you're not going to have a very reliable workflow because you don't know that person. So research the company, research other people who've worked for them. If they've made other products, go and look at all the people who are accredited on that. And if you're not sure about them, contact those people and ask how that client was to work with. And they might go, oh, they're great, they're amazing. And then you kind of have to take a risk sometimes. I mean, but that's totally up to you as to whether you're willing to do that or not. But other times people might be like, they were a nightmare, never work with them again. And those are really valuable. I have told people who've contacted me, how was that freelancer to work with? And I've literally gone like, they were hellish, do not work with them. It was hell. Or I've been like, they were the best freelancer I've ever had, and I'm upset I can't offer them a job. Like I would offer them a job tomorrow. So, you know, a lot of people are willing to give feedback both ways. So you know, you've got to do your research, put your time in, and then you have to make a calculated risk. But if they don't pay, then it's a case of, you can still, if you're in the UK, if they're in the UK, you can say like small claims court. Sending an official letter through a small claims court is like 20-30 quid. So, you know, there are ways that you can start the ball rolling, but you need to talk to someone who knows more about legal stuff than me, because I can't tell you the details of that. But there are ways to make sure someone pays you, and the number one is being the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. It is really the best way to make sure someone pays.
I think as well, it's really important to remember that, especially at the moment where everything's gone online, if you do freelance work, you might be working all over the world, and especially with law and sort of small claims and all that kind of shenanigans, different countries have different rules for different things. So it just really does say the contract is the most important thing. Make sure it's in your contract, you know, that if you don't get paid, you've got some remit for chasing people.
Absolutely.
That did tie in nicely to a question from Sophie. She just asked something similar to what you mentioned at the beginning. In terms of receiving payments, I've heard some freelancers will send either a watermarked or a cropped smaller version of the final image. Is that good practice to do that?
Yeah, if it's your final version, the thing is if you're sending work in progress on a regular basis, say you're sending it every week, you're probably not sending them a high res, and nor should you. You can send them a lower res version of the product, and you can be like, here's my art, but it's only, you know, it's low res, it's smaller, but it shows you all my sketches and my work in progress and my final piece. And then what I used to do was go, yep, that's great, you send us the invoice in the high res. And that would be like that. Once I've said, yes, that's done, it's officially finished. There might be tweaks, but it's a finished piece. So yeah, don't send your high reses until you've had some confirmation that they're going to pay you. Or if you want, you can take a deposit. We do that because we do larger projects now. So we'll work with a client for like 6 to 8 months. So because we're doing much bigger scale projects, we'll take like 25% up front, and that's a non-refundable deposit for our time because we've blocked it out. And then we might agree like deliverables. So once I've delivered this work in progress, then I will invoice you for the next 25%, and so on and so on. And then the final 25% is the final piece where they agree that it's finished. So you're actually already getting money throughout the process. It's not really worth doing if you're doing like a single vignette of a single character on a white background for 125 quid or whatever. It depends what your rates are as well. I'm not saying that is a standard rate. That was just something I pulled out of my head. Everyone's variable and different, and I can't advise you on rates because it is so variable. You know, it's not really worth doing that. But if you want to take a deposit up front for like we used to do those, you know, those huge big battle scenes, they can take like 8 weeks of work, like continuous work. So if you're like doing a £2,000-3,000 project and you're like, I would like to have a deposit on this, please, because I'm dedicating a huge amount of my work, then that is a totally reasonable thing to ask. And you can but ask. It does ensure you as well to make sure you do get paid as well, because they've already sunk money into it, so they're less likely to default at the end. Yeah. So
brilliant. So we've got some more questions. Just these are all sort of tying under the sort of general questions about freelancing. So I've got one from Ethan. He says, if you're working as a freelance artist in the industry, does it offer more creative opportunities than working as an in-house artist, do you think?
Yeah, it definitely can. It depends who you work for as well. So like, I'm just using Games Workshop because I used to know the structure. I mean, I know they've changed their structure a lot now, but artists used to be able to work on all sorts of different things. So they'd be able to work on like the fantasy range and the 40k range and Necromunda and all these different things. But it is a very specific art style that they have. And if you don't want to work all the time in that art style, you might not get on with it. If you're working as a freelancer, obviously you might get a game like Get Bit at the start that I showed you, which is very like cartoony, kind of stylized. And then someone might ask you to do a game which is in Avalon, which is all like photorealistic. And if you're able to do those varieties of structure, then yeah, you have like the world is your oyster. Obviously, there comes a point, a lot of freelancers have this thing where they have get paid jobs and they have fun jobs. And generally invoice a little bit less for the jobs that they really want, because they really want to enjoy having that process of making the cool thing or working on a product that, you know, like on a particular IP that they really love, you know, like a particular, say, I don't know, someone says we want to do a board game of Lego, you know, or like Star Wars, and you're like, I want to work on Star Wars, so yeah, I'm gonna give a different quote because I really want to work in that that IP, then and then you have the get paid jobs where, you know, oh, it's the same thing. We've already done this 100 times. I have drawn so many skulls, but it gives you money, and you are the only one who can pick how much of each one of those you do. But the joy of being a freelancer is, yeah, you get a lot of opportunities to work around, and once you've built up a reputation and a good name for yourself, then more opportunities come to you. And also, there's nothing wrong with approaching people and being like, hey, I really love your products. Do you have any work? I'd love to work with you. And that's totally a fine thing to do. So yeah, there's definitely more opportunity, there's more risk, but there's more opportunity.
It's that variety thing, isn't it, as well? When you're a freelancer, if you work as an in-house artist, you know, say you do work at Games Workshop, chances are you're going to be drawing a lot of Space Marines during your time at Games Workshop, you know. And if you don't like drawing Space Marines, that's going to be quite hard for you to do.
Exactly.
Whereas if you're a freelancer, you can draw some Space Marines, but you can also do some really cool stuff that you do, like, you know, Gribbly Monsters or whatever it is that you want to draw.
Absolutely. So, I mean, at Needy Cat Games, we because we design board games, I actually have lost count of how many dungeon crawlers we've made, because everyone wants a dungeon crawler, and they are our get paid jobs. Like we are done. Like, creatively, I am done with dungeon crawlers, but they pay our bills. But then there are some other projects that I'm not allowed to talk to you about yet because I'm under NDA, which I'm super excited about, and I would have done them regardless because they're so fun and they're such great IPs, and I desperately want to tell everyone about them, but we can't. So yeah, like, you have to pick, and as a freelancer, that is the thing that you learn over time. And yes, you might spend the first couple of years doing get paid jobs, but it does give you the opportunity to do more fun and varied work.
Brilliant. I've got a question from Kira here that sort of ties into that a little bit as well. So this is just a general question about freelancing, really. Again, does it pay enough to make a living off? Is it something that you can be secure with?
I can't promise it will, because it depends on your rates, it depends on your reputation, it depends on the quality of your work, it depends on the consistency of your work, it depends on luck. It can do. Like, we've been paying our mortgage and living on Needy Cat Games for 3.5 years now. It's not easy, and especially the first year was hard because we did deliberately lowball our work and lowball our cost because we wanted the work, because we needed the work to give us a reputation to get more work. And sometimes that happens. And yeah, and sometimes we've had to collaborate where the thing we got out of it wasn't necessarily money, but we did get things out of it. But that is a choice that you need to make based on your personal circumstances. I would say probably don't do what we did, because we were getting really frustrated where we were and sort of jumped into the unknown and just started a business and hoped it would work. Maybe have some savings or a part-time job. Lots of freelancers first start out with like part-time work and freelancing, so that they know they can pay their bills, and then they'll drop the part-time work as their freelancing work increases. But yeah, there is an element of risk, but if you're consistent and you're good at networking and you go out there is a lot of potential within the industry, like so much potential, and we're crying out for artists and graphic designers all the time. So yeah, we are not at full capacity yet for freelancing within the industry.
Absolutely, and there's so many different kinds of companies wanting different types of artwork as well. I think you know, you've got that. There's plenty of work for everybody. One of the reasons why we do what we do, obviously, at Confetti. So we've got a question about portfolio stuff from Joshua. What would be the best software to create an online portfolio? And is there any sort of advice for structuring that as well?
Well, so software is not a thing I don't know anything about, but I mean, where we used to find a lot of our artists, and still do, is either through personal recommendations or through ArtStation or DeviantArt, and just uploading your artwork. You don't need to worry about whether it's, you know, got a good structure, like in terms of like the order of the artwork. I would put your best few pieces first, but like when I'm looking at artists, I will scroll through like sometimes hundreds of pictures, because you're not necessarily looking at each individual picture, you're looking at a body of art. Even something like Instagram means that someone can scroll through your work and see all the different pieces of art that you've made. It just needs to be a gallery. It doesn't need to be complicated. Literally just any gallery format, a Squarespace website that's a gallery will do. And you could then divide it down into like work in progress and pencil sketches and page fillers, but then also have a page which is just all of it in order. And that is great as well. So if you want to do that, you can divide it up if you want, or if you want to divide it by fantasy and then sci-fi or whatever you want that way. But yeah, the most important thing is to have it online. The detail of that is a refining process that what I would do is stick it all up and ask people for feedback, because everybody's individual portfolios will favor certain structures depending on what they've done. So if you've got loads of really amazing sci-fi art, you might have a sci-fi section, but that won't work for everyone. So yeah, make a portfolio, get it out there however you want to do it, and then get feedback on it.
Fabulous. I'm going to do one more question because we are going to run out of time in a couple of minutes. So, and this is a really relevant question actually for everyone. So this is from Tia. Do students have just as good a chance of getting work from people? For example, character design, reference sheets, you know, something to start out with?
Yes, absolutely. No one's like going, oh, you're a student, I won't give you work. In fact, last year when there was the end of year, was it last year? Oh,
yeah, it celebrated.
Yeah.
It was the year before.
Yeah, it was the celebrate. It was the year before.
We didn't do one last year, unfortunately, because of COVID.
Everything's just merged. We actually saw 2 artists at that because we went, and we were like, they're great, and we paid them for work. And we approached them on the day and went, we'd like to pay you to do some work, and they both were shocked. Yeah, it's absolutely just putting your artwork out there, talking to people, being visible and being present in the space, and people will offer you work. People don't say like, how old are you? And I mean, other than, how old are you? 18, and your work is this good. Oh, that's the best you'll get.
I do that all the time.
But yeah, we have paid people as a consequence of seeing their work at exhibitions, and other people have too. And if you get your stuff online and you start talking to people and networking, then people will recognize you and the quality of your work, and then that's how you get work.
And the key thing, I think, as well, from a networking point of view here, is get involved in those things like the Tabletop Games collective that you've got set up in Nottingham. That's a really good opportunity to network, get to know people, kind of find out what they want as well. I think that's the other thing. You know, there will be people that want vehicles, there will be people that want fantasy characters, for example, and just get to know those people.
And you might find that someone just gives you feedback on your portfolio where they go, this is great, but you haven't shown me anything of X, Y, and Z. Are you able to do that? You might go, oh my God, I totally forgot to put people's faces in this, and I draw faces all the time. There just might be blank spots that you've not noticed, and getting that feedback will just make the quality of the work you're doing and the portfolio you're putting out better as well. So yeah, other people are basically just use them for all of the feedback you can get and get better.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great advice all around. Thanks, Sophie, for the talk. Hopefully the students have found that really inspiring.